Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Money Mondays. If it is 9 a.m. on Monday, it is Money Mondays time. My name is Paul Johnson. I am the Director of Economic and Community Development here at GPCOG.
I am Belinda Ray. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at GPCOG.
And today we're going to talk about ourselves a little bit. We're going to talk about the ongoings behind the scenes of GPCOG. Twofold, because number one, you deserve to know if you are part of a member community. And number two, perhaps we say something or talk about something that is useful and relevant to your neck of the woods. So with that, today we are going to talk about navigating the current federal funding landscape. And again, we're going to give you a little peek behind the curtain on what we're doing, and perhaps it could spark conversation and ideas for you. So with that, our guiding principles, which are pretty similar to our guiding principles of how we operate before the new administration, is number one, we stay flexible and adaptable. I think anybody that works with GPCOG knows that's probably our greatest strengths. Some of us work at GPCOG know that sometimes that's a pain in the butt, but that is that is by far our biggest strength.
Agreed.
Number two is just to respond to new information and events. Number three, seek out new opportunities. Belinda and I, specifically Belinda and I, have been tasked to keep an eye out for always new ways to diversify our funding and look for new opportunities for GPCOG. And number four, apply lessons learned to future actions, right? What we're experiencing now at the federal level, we're probably going to see another iteration of it in some form within the next few years, right? So if we can take what's happening now and know how and learn how we navigate it and what worked and what doesn't work, the next time around or the next event, we can make it easier on ourselves and our member communities by understanding our lessons learned. And with that, I will hand it back to Belinda to give you a snapshot of our current funding.
Yes, so GPCOG is largely funded by federal dollars. You can see here in our pie chart, it's 64.4%. Our total revenue is about $6 million in the most recent budget, and federal dollars are $3.87 million of that funding. So this is kind of a look at some of the grants that we have, the federal grants, and you can see that of these active grants, it's 11.7 million total, and we've spent, a couple, what's that, 3 million, 4 million. And we have 7.8 million left in these grants. Those are straight federal to us. Then we have some state grants that are funded by federal grants, like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So we have a couple of those passing through. So that's another 520, of which we have 434,000 remaining. We have years on these grants still. And then the last one, the last category, these are federal funds that we have been awarded. So we won these grants, but we don't yet have contracts for them. And some of them were awarded right around January. And that Clean Cities one is upcoming, and we're uncertain about all of this funding because we haven't really had a lot of communication as to whether it's going to continue. So that's 11.9 million right there. So overall, on this page, well, actually, I'll go to overall. So 20 million federal funds outstanding. 8.2 million of those are under contract, so we would expect that that will be honored, but we're not positive. And then we have 11.9 million that we're waiting for contracts and hoping that those are going to come through. So that's kind of where our federal funding stands right now. And the reason we have some uncertainty here is that there have been some executive orders, and that's had some impact on our work. So Trump has signed 81, and actually I did that on Thursday. It's at least 82 now because I heard about another one on Friday. So I'm not sure what it is today, but 81. For perspective, Biden signed 77 in his first year, 35 of them between January 20th and March 7th. So executive orders are not unprecedented. Overall, in the first Trump administration, there were 220, and in Biden's, there were 162. And then from the For What It's Worth department, Jimmy Carter signed 320 in his 4 years. So the executive order thing is not new. I think we are seeing more breadth and scope and swiftness of action at this point. So that's a little different. And there are two in particular that have had the most impact on us to date, and they are unleashing American energy and ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. So if we look at those, unleashing American energy is the one that had the order in there to pause federal funding that came through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So that language is in there, and all departments that had funding through these federal departments were supposed to review their programs for potential conflict with Section 2 of this order, and we'll get back to that. Then they were, once they reviewed, to report to the Office of Management and Budget, get an okay to resume their disbursements. So that's kind of what the executive order said. Section 2 is all about energy policy, and I have all these bullets here, but essentially it's they want to make sure there aren't conflicts in things that have been awarded federal funding that would impede energy exploration in the US of a certain sort. They want to make sure that there's nothing that would restrict our ability to become a leading producer of non-fuel minerals. They want people to have choice over the vehicles and the appliances that they purchase. So they don't want electric vehicles, for instance, to be unfairly subsidized in a way that would limit the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles. So things like that, Section 2. And then I'll go to the second one here. Ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. So for this one didn't say anything about pausing funding at all, but it did say that within 60 days, which would, from the date of the order, that would be March 21st, that departments have to provide the Office of Management and Budget with a list of grantees who have received funding that is associated with to provide or advance DEI, environmental justice, things like that. And what they're to do is to assess how much has this cost and then make recommendations for all the programs to align them with the policy of equal dignity outlined in Section 1 of this order. And Section 1 is longer than this, but this is kind of the key statement here, that Americans deserve a government committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect, and to expending precious taxpayer resources only on making America great. So those are the two that have impacted us most. None of our grants conflict with unleashing American energy, and that's the one that was pausing grants. Virtually everything we have through the federal government conflicts with the ending radical and wasteful spending. And that is because much of that money came through the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law, and virtually all of those funding opportunities include Justice 40 requirements. So as we were writing grants to apply for these things, we had to highlight how we would focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So of course, all of our grants have that language in it. So Paul, I'm going to pass it back to you here.
Yeah. So what does it look like for GPCOG's day to day? So a couple things is primarily with a lot of our federal grants, we are paid on a reimbursement basis. So we do the work, and then every month or every quarter, we go back and we bill the federal government and we get reimbursed. So the most of our funding portals have been locked at one point. So some point in the since January, most of our federal portals that we would submit our paperwork, submit our timesheet, so to speak, and get reimbursed, those have been locked at some point. Currently, as we speak today, those are all open. And I believe, Belinda, we've essentially, we're being paid just like we would be getting paid at any other time in the last few years.
Yes.
So there was certainly some times where there was One portal might be open, the other one might be open, and we don't know, what's happening. But right now, as we speak, they are all currently open and we're getting paid. The federal contacts that we have. So for instance, I work for federal contacts at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Economic Development Administration. So those are the two people that I talk to at the federal level for my job. They've been very helpful. They do have limited information at times. So they relay what they can, but they certainly don't try to relay what they can't. So the uncertainty does exist above us as well, but by and large, the communication hasn't ceased. It is all very much you still get responses when you email people, but sometimes they don't know what's happening, so they're not going to necessarily overcommit, or they're not going to suggest. They're very cautious with their words, but they're still helpful. They're still there, and they still are communicating. Belinda, do you agree with your experience as well?
Yes, we definitely had one grant in particular that, because of its focus on environmental justice, uh, has presented more problems, and we lost the ability to see the grant in the portal for a while, which was concerning. And then finally it came back up, and then finally we were able to get reimbursement. We, excuse me, we just had our first meeting with our EPA contact since January 6th. So we hadn't really been able to have any communication, but that does appear to be back on track now.
We've done language updates for current grants. As Belinda said, some of this or a lot of this is really just a shifting of priority of language, right? So we had language for one priority, and now that's null, and now we need to update that. So we're doing a lot of that work on the back end. And we've updated some language on our website, which I'll show you an example of on the next slide. So there have been several people in the organization tasked with retroactively going through current grants and some of our public-facing material and saying, let's update this to reflect new priorities. Number 4, our quote, typical paperwork language has been updated. A great example is, at this point, I think everybody on the line knows I run the Brownfields program at GPCOG. A lot of that is just paperwork. And on the back end, some of my forms are different. They certainly aren't any more or actually they're probably slightly less stressful. There's almost less requirements for me to fill out. But those have all been updated, but I still submit in the, as far as the directions that I have to do and what I have to follow to get money out the door, it's all the same. My quote pencil pushing activity is just a little bit different, but it doesn't affect my day-to-day, so to speak. And lastly, GPCOG continues to diversify its funding. One of the things that, and these numbers are very approximate, but when Christina Egan took over as executive director, I believe we've talked internally, I think we were 90% federally funded. And not only that, the amount of funding sources we have at the federal level has been diversified. So not only are we trying to be less dependent on the federal government, but within the federal government, we have different agencies and different subsections of those agencies that we have funding through, right? So one of the big things we're continuously doing, which frankly makes no difference who's in office, is as a healthy organization, we should diversify how we receive funding. Belinda, do you anything to add to that? Or
I don't think so. I would just say, as we do these language updates, again, as Paul said, we had certain verbiage that spoke to priorities of the previous administration. We are altering the verbiage, highlighting different aspects of our work. We are doing the same work, and we have always done work that serves our entire region. So we feel that we can update our language and still be true to everything we have always done, but it is not easy to do all of this shifting so quickly.
which is a great segue to the last slide. That is 9:14. And I apologize for this is a little small, but this is just a screen grab from our website. And you'll notice that this is now frankly, I forgot what it used to be called, but now it's called Energy Independence. And there's little tweaks to wording. If you look at essentially, let's look at the last sentence. The program is comprised of fleet managers, business owners, state and local officials, clean fuel providers, and the public interested in promoting the use of clean fuels, clean fuel vehicles, and reducing dependence on international fuel sources. So we're not staying away from language, so to speak. We're just restating what we do, and we are just stressing how this might serve a different set of priorities, right? But we're not pretending there isn't clean energy. We're not pretending we're doing something that we're not. But what we are is just saying, hey, look, this is going to benefit this is going to benefit our independence, and it's good for the economy, and it's good for jobs, and it's good for business owners. If you look here, John's title is still Sustainability Program Coordinator. We haven't changed anybody's job title, so to speak. But what we're doing is we're just focusing on different strengths, so to speak. And so this is just an edit I made personally to the website. I was tasked to editing some of the website, and it gives you an idea of, quote, the pivot. And frankly, organizations like GPCOG pivot every 4 years, maybe every 8 years, but this is part of existing as a nonprofit that receives federal dollars. And with that, it's 9:15. So we hope you enjoyed the peek behind the curtain of GPCOG and maybe some useful information for yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we continue to do this work every day to remain in compliance with executive orders as they come out, and continue to do the good work that GPCOG has always done.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.